welcome to this museum midday. We're glad that you were able to join us. We're coming to you today from the Deer Mountain Hatchery here in Ketchikan, Alaska. And of course, we are located here on the traditional lands of the Sonyaquan and Tontaquan people of the Tlingit First Nation. So we're very pleased to be able to be coming to you from the Deer Mountain Hatchery with Tessa Frost, who is the Research and Evaluation Manager for Sarah here, and with Matt Allen, who's the Deer Mountain Hatchery Manager. So I know I kind of have already introduced you, but if you can let us know, Matt, if we can start with you, a little bit about what you do here with Deer Mountain Hatchery.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Matt Allen. I'm the Deer Mountain Hatchery Manager, and I'm responsible for a couple of things here. We rear king and coho salmon for enhancing commercial, sport, personal uses in subsistence fisheries in the Southeast Alaska area. And we also perform outreach and educational opportunities with the local schools, the community, and tourists. And we also offer support to other departments and other Sarah hatcheries and facilities.
Right. And Tessa, so I know we talked about your title there, Research and Evaluation Manager. What is it that you do and what is your specialty?
Yeah, so I'm Tessa Frost. I'm the biologist for Sarah, and we have several hatcheries in Ketchikan, Petersburg, over in Prince of Wales, and then remote release sites as well. And I'm responsible for all the forecasting for Sarah, keeping track of all the salmon that are coming back. We also oversee all of the pathology, so any disease that might come up to treat, both preventative and reactive. And then we do water quality sampling at all of the hatcheries and release sites just to monitor the environment. We also sample all of the salmon that come back to the processing plants, and then sample all of the adults that are taken as broodstock for eggs as well. So I just kind of oversee all of the the big picture questions and help people anticipate what's coming back the next year.
So for people who are not familiar with the idea of a fish hatchery, can you guys, we'll let you bounce between the two of you, whoever would like to answer this or expand on it, a little bit about why the Deer Mountain Hatchery is here and what is the purpose here to have a fish hatchery of all things? I mean, can't fish just do their own thing? So please expand.
Yeah, well, the hatcheries as we know them today really came about due to recognizing that runs were depleting in certain areas of the state. Primarily due to natural cycles and some overharvest. So in the late 70s, legislation was passed that allowed for the enhancement of salmon throughout Alaska. And there's primarily 5 private, nonprofit, regional hatchery associations, of which Sarah is one and is the southernmost. And being in Southeast traditionally has pretty strong or abundant pink salmon returns. So one of the primary species that Sarah produces is chum salmon, in particular summer chum. But we also produce coho and chinook as well. And so our mission is to rear and release during the early life stages those 3 species, really to provide additional enhanced fishing opportunity.
Fantastic. So that's a little bit about Southern Southeast Regional Aquaculture Association. So Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the history of the Deer Mountain Hatchery, because it predates Sarah's inception?
Yeah. Sarah, the Deer Mountain Hatchery is really one of the oldest still operating hatcheries or facilities in the state. It was one of the first permitted, but there's been a hatchery at this general location since the early 1900s. The hatchery that exists now was constructed beginning in 1954, completed in 1955, and that was really at the behest of the Ketchikan King Salmon Derby Committee and the Chamber of Commerce. Since that time, there's been several different operators of this facility. Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the Fred Division, operated it from the mid to late 70s to about 1994 when the Fred Division dissolved and the department stepped away. And actually during that time, the department, this was a research and evaluation facility, and a lot of what they did then has informed and still informs what we do today in terms of our overall rearing and release strategies. And then when the department stepped away in '94, the Ketchikan Indian community assumed operation, and they continued to enhance king, coho, and some steelhead in the Ketchikan Creek. But they also operated it as an outreach and educational facility to educate people about their culture. And they also had a raptor center here, rescue raptor center here, which some of the bones of that still exist. But they stepped away in about 2013, and finally at that time it sort of made sense for Sarah to assume operation. And after some renovating and some upgrades, we had our first release in 2015. And since then we've expanded our production. We release about 100,000 fish, king salmon into Ketchikan Creek every spring, and we are now doing both kings and coho, some of which go to Carroll Inlet for saltwater rearing and release, and that's a cooperative program with SEPA. And then we're also sending now fall coho up to Anita Bay.
Well, I definitely want to take advantage of having a biologist here and talking with us. Tessa, can you comment on the size of the Deer Mountain facility compared to some of the others that Sarah runs in the area?
Yeah, absolutely. Deer Mountain is a pretty small facility. They also raise AAA trout for stocking in the Ketchikan Lake system. That's a new program that's funded by Sportfish. And so AAA trout are sterile, so they can't reproduce in the wild, and so they're used a lot up north in Alaska where there's problems with invasive species, but they still want to provide fishing opportunity for sport anglers. So AAA trout come down here from the William Jack Hernandez Hatchery in Anchorage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then those fish are also used in the Derby in the park behind us. So, but yeah, Deer Mountain is pretty small. We like to take advantage of that. The rearing containers here are unique in that we can kind of ask different questions and evaluate them, whereas the other hatcheries, Whitman Lake, which is located in Herring Cove here in Ketchikan, they have long concrete raceways, and they can hold anywhere from 80,000 to 250,000 fish, whereas these circulars and Swedes, how many fish do they hold?
Oh, about 20 to 34,000.
Yeah, so 20 to 30,000. So if Matt wants to say, okay, I'm interested in looking at how a fish does under this feeding regime versus another one, all of the king and coho fish are coated wire tagged with unique barcodes. So basically we take this teeny tiny metal tag and we insert it into the snout of the nose, and then we clip the adipose fin on the fish's back. And so we can raise these fish in different ways, release them into the water, and then when they come back, that head is taken and the barcode is read, and we can learn different things about how the fish did, what was its overall survival, what was its contribution to different fisheries, and it's nice to have a facility here in town that used to be a research facility and now serves as both enhancement and research.
Well, and education. I know
Yes.
we've had many people who've come through on tours, and we can't help but comment the colorful mural that's behind you. Matt, I know you had a little bit of information. Can you share a little bit about the mural and just having this center as a place for education as well?
Yeah, so the mural you see around us and behind us was done by the Tongan School of Arts and Science. Lauren McHugh and her students came here in the spring months, and they call it the Wall of Artsy Salmon. And this was the student's vision. Each one of these, a student designed and painted on the wall and put their name to it or their initials, and it was their vision of what a salmon is to them. But that goes along with our other educational opportunities. We do Salmon in the Classroom, which is a program that the state does as well. Most of their operations are up in the interior. But we work with the Forest Service. They do, we give them eggs, and they have a salmon in the classroom program, both at their Discovery Center and at North Point Higgins. Here at Deer Mountain, we work directly with Ketchikan Charter, Fawn Mountain, Thomas School of Arts and Science. We've done a little bit of work with Houtling. And those are primarily kindergarten or third grade students. That's when they're doing that program. We also do spawning demonstrations in the fall, and we do dissections and stuff in the classrooms as well. And it's a really great opportunity to introduce what we do and salmon in general to younger school-age students.
People don't realize in Ketchikan how many of the fish that they catch come from Sarah. We have created some signs that we've placed strategically around town, Cedars Lodge, Clover Pass, Ketchikan Creek Bridge. But over 70% of the fish, of the king salmon at least, that someone were to go out and catch are a Sarah king salmon. And with coho, it's closer to 90%. And so just creating awareness that, we are here, we're funded by the stakeholders, the fishermen make the decisions for Sarah about where we're going to put these fish, what are we going to raise, and they're meant to be caught, so we want people to catch them and enjoy them. They spend very little of their life in a hatchery, and 99% of their body weight is put on in the ocean. So there's differences between wild and hatchery fish, but once they're out there, they're all the same.
Well, let's take a look. Pick your brain as far as the sheer numbers. So, how many eggs are you raising from that egg state to when they're finally released? And can you talk a little bit about that rate of survival here at the hatchery, and then what they might experience, just eggs out in the wild, if you can compare those two for us?
I think 210 million chum salmon eggs is our goal for this year. And those eggs are released from the Canadian border at Tree Point all the way up to Anita Bay outside of Petersburg. And so they're distributed around, but most of the egg takes happen at 2 facilities. And then in the wild, that's the biggest difference between a hatchery fish and a wild fish, is wild fish swim up the stream, they dig their redd, they deposit their eggs, but their survival to emergent fry, so their survival over the winter is quite low. I believe it's somewhere around 10%. And that can be due to too much rain in the fall, too little rain, bears digging up their stuff, other salmon digging up their eggs. Whereas in the hatchery environment, it differs by species, but in general, there's about a 90 to 95% survival to emergent fry. And so we just give the salmon a little bit more of an advantage in that a lot more of the eggs that are collected come out as actual fish, whereas in the wild, they tend to not survive in the gravel.
So that stock of fish, how long, Matt, do you have them here from that egg state to when they're actually released? Can you kind of very simplify it down for us as far as, what do those steps look like?
Yeah, it really depends on the species. So if you're talking about raising pinks or chums, those are species that can make the transition to saltwater at a very young age. So when we're collecting our summer chum eggs, usually late July, early August, they're incubated throughout the winter. They'll hatch, maybe November, December, maybe even October. And they'll be emergent, which is the point to where they've absorbed their yolk sac. They would emerge from, the substrate in an incubator or the substrate in a river up into the water column. They'd be looking for food. And it's at that point we would transition them, out-migrate them into saltwater net pens. And in a place like Neats Bay, that's usually happening maybe late January, early February. And they'll be, reared and released until late April, early May. And so, really they're, 8 months, maybe 9 months at a hatchery before they get released. And in the case of a chum salmon, they'll go and be out in the ocean for, on average, 3 to 5 years. If you're talking about a smolt species like a coho or a chinook, our chinook that we rear here are we are required from eggs from returning adults to our Whitman Lake facility out in Herring Cove. And they return usually in late May throughout July, maybe even August. But we collect those the majority of the brood stock over the entirety of the run, but primarily in July. They'd be spawned in August. Incubated, they would hatch out usually November, December, be emergent in March. And then again, they would, instead of going out into a saltwater net pen, they need about an additional year of freshwater rearing to attain a size to where they can make the transition to saltwater. And when that happens, our two main rearing or release strategies is either getting them up to 25 grams, which we do here with 100,000 that we release into Ketchikan Creek, to 25 grams and release them directly into an estuary or a small river like Ketchikan Creek, or they go out in saltwater net pens for final imprinting and grow out. And one of the main reasons that salmon have evolved to go out into the ocean is because it's a much more of a productive rearing environment. So they can go there and find food and get quite large, and then they come back to freshwater to spawn because it's a relatively safe place for their offspring to be reared short term.
So here at Deer Mountain Hatchery, I know we've got some of these outdoor areas here. You see lots and lots of tiny fish. What kind of fish am I looking at? How old are they, and like what size? Can you just kind of give us the rundown of when we might, when these hatched out and when we might see them in the rivers?
Yeah. So the fish that you see here in these circulars, they will all be released either this late April or early May. So they're coming to the end of their hatchery life cycle, and they were taken as eggs. They're what we call their brood year was 2020. So they're reaching the end of their cycle. Because they're going to be released directly into Ketchikan Creek, they're the largest fish that we have on site. They're about 20 to 25 grams right now, which is where we want them to be. And this particular stock of king salmon comes from the Chickaman River.
So that's kind of like almost an 18-month cycle,
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, it's about a year and a half for coho and kings, and then 9 months for chum salmon.
So one of the questions we frequently get from tourists and visitors alike as they're looking at Ketchikan Creek is, what kind of fish are they seeing? So can you talk about what fish are in Ketchikan Creek?
Go ahead.
Okay. So we released the king salmon into Ketchikan Creek, and then there's a wild run of pink salmon as well. And then people catch all sorts of things in Ketchikan Creek. There's even sockeye caught occasionally, which is quite rare. Those are not from Ketchikan Creek, but are there chum in there?
Yeah, we'll see some stray summer chum, either from the wild or from hatchery releases. But it's pretty exceedingly rare, and that might predominantly be due to years of low water, where they're really just looking for a place to go spawn, and at some point almost any place will do. Whether it will be successful or not is a different story.
So the end of April, beginning of May, with these fingerling, these small size salmon being released. Can you talk about the logistics of moving these fish from the pens that are in front of us to where they're going to be released?
Yeah, Sarah, as it's grown and as we've acquired new facilities and new release sites, our how we move our fish, where they're released is actually gotten quite complicated and involved. So here, releasing into Ketchikan Creek is probably the one of the most simplest or most simple releases that we have. Basically, when that time comes, they're ready to be released. We simply just pump them out. We have a little holding area over here. When we're releasing these fish, they want to go. They're ready to go into the ocean. So we will pump them out, and sometimes within 15, 20 minutes, you'll see them down in Thomas Basin. Other fish that we rear here go to remote rearing and release sites. So Carroll Inlet, which is the closest release site for our king salmon coming from here, is about a 4 or 5 hour trip via a tender. So what we do there is we back a tanker truck. One of the trucks we use is actually the old de-icing truck from the airport. We put about anywhere from 50 to 100,000 fish in that truck. We pump them in it. They drive down to the AGS dock, and they will be gravity fed from that tanker into the hold of a tender. So the same boat that transports them to their final rearing site and release site will be the boat that very well may pack them as a returning adult to a processor. But we're moving both chum fry and coho and Chinook smolt throughout all of Southeast Alaska. As Tessa alluded to, we have release sites at Nakit, Kendrick, Anita Bay, Port Assumption, Port St. Nick off the outer coast of POW, and we've got release sites up in
Now, Tessa mentioned earlier the sterilized trout and fishing opportunities for kids and the derby that takes place in the park. Can you talk a little bit about, I know one of my favorite parts of the year is seeing everyone out in the creek with their dip nets. So can you talk a little bit about that time of year and how Sarah and Deer Mountain is involved?
Yeah, that started just a couple years ago, but I believe it was pretty normal practice when KIC ran the facility. And the Sarah program, we only need a certain amount of eggs from our adults, and then we don't have any need for the rest of them. Once the fish come into the river, into the fresh water, they tend to get dark. And what that is actually is the pigment in their meat. So salmon have red meat for the most part. The pigment in their meat starts to bleed out of their through their skin, and so that's why you see those colors. And we want people to be able to harvest those fish before their meat is completely white. And so Fish and Game contacted us a couple years ago and said, hey, there's extra fish swimming around. Do you guys need them? If you don't, can we provide some opportunity to locals? And absolutely. And so it's a little ladder out there. I'm sure you've seen it. So Matt can just close that ladder and the fish can't come up into the hatchery, and that allows people to go out there with their dip nets. And I don't know if you've ever dip netted, but you just stand there and hold out this really big net, and you've got a 20-pound fish swimming into it, and then you have to get them to shore and not fall and totally flood your waders. So it's a really big fishery up in places like the Kenai River. I mean, it's like shoulder to shoulder, all day, all night combat fishing, whereas here in Ketchikan Creek, it's just a fun way for people to get out and catch those kings that are meant to be caught, and people can smoke them, eat them fresh, however they want.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned tagging earlier as far as, the actual metal, tag that you're doing. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the ear fish bones and how that's also a method of kind of, is this correct, in tracking which hatchery or which fishery they came from. Can you talk about how fish ear bones and the rings are used?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So fish ear bones are called otoliths, and they're hard calcium carbonate structures that they're really cool, useful features that the fish have. I mean, the fish use them for like buoyancy, staying where they want to in the water column. But they lay rings down, daily growth rings, similar to rings on a tree. So if you cut a tree, you can count the rings and see how old that tree is. Well, same thing with otoliths. And the other really cool thing is they respond immediately to basically stress. And so we can lay what is essentially a barcode on the otolith that tells us how old that fish is, where that fish came from. And so this is how we track our chum salmon and pink salmon. Sarah doesn't raise pink salmon, but in other areas that do. And then we do otolith mark our Chinook and coho as well. However, because of the treaty between the U.S. and Canada, the coated wire tags are what they use to track to look at and see, okay, the U.S. caught this many fish, Canada caught this many fish. So they're not as highly referenced in coho and Chinook, but the chum salmon, last year we read 17,000 chum salmon otoliths just here in Ketchikan. And so it helps us realize where we are in the run. older fish come back sooner, and so once we start seeing younger age classes of fish, we're able to say, okay, we think we're at the peak of the run, or we're past the peak of the run. And then once the fishery is done, we compile all those otoliths and say, okay, the survival of the Neats Bay chum salmon was 2% this year. And that helps us get an idea of what's going to come the following year. There are some big differences between a hatchery in the lower 48, like Washington or Oregon, for example, compared to an Alaska hatchery. Hatcheries along the West Coast were implemented to essentially augment the salmon runs that were being, in essence, kind of cut off by the dams that were being put in. Whereas the Alaska hatcheries were created to enhance and supplement the catch, so that when fishermen were out there harvesting pink salmon, chum salmon, whatnot, they could target hatchery fish and thereby allow the wild fish to return to their natal streams and spawn. And so there can be some anti-hatchery sentiment around. There's films that come out occasionally, and unfortunately they're just a very small glimpse into what aquaculture is. And it can be misleading to the public. And so just awareness that, you know, we're all invested in salmon. Alaskans love their salmon, and hatcheries are no different. We are here to enhance the fisheries so that people can enjoy the natural resource, but you know, we care about the resource as much as anyone else. And we invest a lot of time and money into making sure we are doing things the right way and not having a negative impact on wild stocks. And so just, I guess, educating the people that come through and, you know, coming at it from the point that we're all on the same team when we're not fighting each other.
Now, I know at one point in time, Matt, you mentioned the stamps that people can buy. Is that still something that supports Sarah or Deer Mountain?
Yeah. You know, so if you buy a sport fish license, you can buy a king salmon stamp. I buy a king salmon stamp every year, even though I don't go out and actively king salmon fish. I'm lucky enough that I can dip one out of a raceway when they return as an adult. But yes, that, you know, some of our programs, our Crystal Lake Hatchery in particular, is a state-owned facility that we operate, and so some of those funds that you know or go into state coffers from the purchase of that king salmon stamp ultimately helps support some of our programs and some of the fish that we release here in Southeast.
Well, you've answered a whole wide variety of questions here. Are there any other things that you'd want to make certain people know about Deer Mountain Hatchery?
Yeah, we're here. We want people to know that we're here to provide, you know, not just fishing opportunity, but educational opportunity. We want to be good neighbors. We don't plan on going anywhere, and you know, we want to hear from people too. As much as we, you know, want to educate people, provide them with opportunity, we want to hear from people as well. You know, what do they need? What can we do to help them? You know, and another thing too, we might not do all so well, but we you know want to improve upon is engaging with the community and let them know that, you know, of the work that we do and the opportunities that we can provide people that enjoy this lifestyle. You know, whether it's working at a remote hatchery or an in-town facility, or you know, working in our research and evaluation department, there are good jobs here that provide an opportunity to support the local industry and communities of Southeast.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we'll make certain to link your website and some other information about Sarah and Deer Mountain Hatchery. And I think the thing we need to keep in mind is Deer Mountain Hatchery is just one of a satellite of other hatcheries that Sarah's part of. So we'll make certain to share that information. And again, I want to thank both of you all for joining us for this museum midday and giving us kind of an inside look here at Deer Mountain Hatchery and a little bit about the work that you do here day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Cool.